From the gridiron to one shining moment, we bring you All-American from Studio A. It's called All-American for a reason. That means we've got all of the American covered, including men's and women's basketball. Welcome alongside Maria Trivelpiece. I'm Kyle Youmans to our first American basketball All-American episode of 2025. I am so excited to talk hoops with you, Maria, over the next couple of months leading into what is going to be an incredible championship weekend in Fort Worth, Texas, Dickies Arena for both the men's and women's tournaments at the end of, or in the middle of March, that is. So much to talk about. Can't wait to get to it.
I am so excited. I also don't think that we should have been given basketballs because I feel like one of us is going to drop this at some point. But That's besides the point. As you mentioned, I am so excited. So much has already happened in the American basketball slate. We're going to talk about conference, non-conference, and what we're looking forward to.
Yeah, it's exactly the case. Now, because of this, we're going to hit both the men's and women's shows today. Men's and women's basketball into the start of the season for both. Kind of an all-encompassing episode today. And then starting next week, we're going to alternate. We're going to start with the women first. We're going to talk about women in detail whenever it comes to the best teams in the conference, the American Conference as a whole, and what women's hoops is doing. Then the week after that, we will go into the men's side of the game. So really excited to kind of go detail and funnel in. We want to start by setting the table. For those who may just now be joining us after football season's over with, you turn your attention to basketball now that the 2025 calendar year is here. So with all that, what are some of the early takeaways from across the American on both sides of the coin?
Well, I think on both sides, the teams that we thought would be at the top are at the top. Yeah. You see South Florida playing really well on the women's side. We see Memphis playing really well on the men's side. But there are other teams that we maybe didn't think were going to make an impact in the American. UTSA on the women's side, the only undefeated team left in league play. And then just other different men's teams. Temple making a little bit of noise. Temple on the women's side as well. So when I look at that overall encompassing things, yes, we pegged some of the right ones at the top when those preseason standings went out. But there's some lurking, like when we talked about in football, teams lurking. That I'm excited to talk about today.
That was kind of my whole thought as well, is you get these preseason polls and they're voted on by the media, voted on by coaches, whichever poll you look at specifically. And going into it, the anticipation was that you were going to see Memphis on the men's side of things. UAB was the favorite in the conference. And then here comes North Texas and Temple, some of those other schools that have had success in the past and maybe were expected to have a down year, whether it be because of graduations or transfer portal or one of these, a couple of these different elements. And then on the women's side, all the teams we anticipated to be right there in the mix. USF, South Florida, what they've done this year under Jose Fernandez. You've got Jason Burton in the North Texas Mean Green, Rice, Tulsa, all these teams in the mix, and then there's UTSA kind of setting the standard. So we'll talk about the women's bracket and the women's standings momentarily. Let's talk about the men's standings first. We talked about it. Memphis, UAB, USF, UNT, all been pretty good this year, but in a different order than maybe we even anticipated.
Yeah, I think UAB, now they're kind of kicking it into gear into conference play. We'll talk a little bit about their non-conference struggles, but Memphis, again, 3-0 in conference play. I think that's intriguing, too, because there were some moments last year where they maybe fell apart. We'll talk about how they've been holding it together. And so I think that Tulane in that spot right there, I want to see them play more games because their non-conference wasn't great. Now showing up in league play has been kind of interesting for me to see. Yeah,
the American on the men's side of things has two teams currently in the top 60 of the net rankings. That's Memphis and North Texas. Those are the two that are inside that top 60. Of course, inside the top 45 is where you want to be in terms of an at-large bid in the net. And then there are three teams in the top 100 of Ken Pom, and there's a team right on the outside of that top 100 in UAB that's trying to get back inside the top 100 of both. I feel like across the board there's a level of disrespect from a national standpoint when looking at the Americans' men's teams. I mean, just look at the teams that are in the conference, plain and simple, first off. You've got UAB, you've got North Texas, you've got Memphis, you've got Temple. All of these teams in recent memory, last 5, 6, 7 years, have not only made it to March and gotten to the big dance, they've made noise in the big dance previously. So And Wichita State, of course, that's probably more like a decade ago. They're trying to win some of their same tradition back into the fold from a Shocker standpoint. We'll talk about them in later episodes. But the whole group of men's teams doesn't get the thought process. The fact that there are only 3 in the top 100 of the Ken Pom rankings, that needs to be higher. We've seen that already. North Texas is a great team, but they were picked to finish 7th in this conference, and they're currently ranked inside the top 80 of the Nets. So if that's the case, put 6 or 7 other teams inside that top 100, and let's have a conversation. So it has been a wild start to the season. I still think this is an underrated conference. I said that about football. And who was right about football?
Kyle was right. And it pains me to say Kyle's right about anything, but you were very right. 6-2 in bowl season.
It's good basketball.
It was.
This is a good basketball conference.
And I'm excited to talk about it. And so if we're going to talk about good basketball, starting on the men's side, let's talk about Memphis, because I feel like when people think about the American and they think about the good teams on the men's side, Memphis comes to mind. Just take a look at some of those non-conference wins, Kyle. When you look at those, which one stands out to you the most?
The number one is of course, UConn. That's a team that's won back-to-back national championships. That was down in the Maui Invitational, a chance with those MTEs, the multi-team events that everybody talks about. That was the win, the Memphis win over UConn that sent their coach into a spiral on the media. I don't even want to say a name. But when you talk about Memphis right now, this is the biggest boomer bust, not only in the American, maybe in the country, because of how much talent that they have, and all of these wins certainly build the resume. They'll be involved in March, no doubt in my mind, because they're talented enough. They moved up to the 18th spot in the AP Top 25 this week as well. But then you lose games to Arkansas State. Good team, shouldn't lose that game. Mississippi State, same thing. Good team, good conference, shouldn't lose that game to Mississippi State. Then you had close calls along the way. Yes, you won these games across the board, and these are certainly significant wins, but you had close calls against East Carolina, a team that's in the middle of the road right now in the American. UNT, we'll talk about here in a little bit, that are playing above their pay grade right now, or at least above expectation right now. Close calls against Louisiana Tech at home, San Francisco early in the season. I want to see more consistency. They're 13-3. The record's great. But when it comes down to a young team, and they are young. I mean, PJ Haggerty is still an underclassman. He's been fantastic. Plays at a very, very high level. This is a gifted team. Tyrese Hunter as well. I want to see more from Memphis in a consistent standpoint before I really tab them as the favorites and one of the top 25 teams in the country.
See, I agree with you, but I think that they are going to become more consistent. So yeah. As I've been watching them play, and you see what Penny Hardaway has kind of spoken in the media, and you know, every coach is going to say we have good chemistry and different things like that, but he compares them to last year's team and the struggles that team faced, where they weren't able to be consistent. They had talent, but they couldn't. That game against ECU, Hardaway used that as an example. He said last year we lose that game because there's just nobody who kind of puts the team on their back and finds a way to win. And especially when you're playing in the American, everybody knows that Memphis is the number one target. They're going to get everybody's best game. And so I think what Hardaway has done this year, he brought an entirely different roster, entirely different coaching staff. They're starting to gel, and that's where the inconsistency is right now, is because there are a lot of new faces, almost entirely new faces on that roster. So they're still trying to learn each other. I think that consistency will increase as the season goes on. And I think the fact that they are winning that ECU game as opposed to losing it, or some of those close calls are wins instead of losses in close calls, I think that shows that the consistency can build. And I think that they're going to continue to do that as the season goes on.
That's very well said, and I couldn't agree more, because while I'm asking for consistency, like I said, they're 13-3. It's not like this is a bad team and I'm saying that they aren't good enough to do what they're doing right now. It's not the case. I think I can see more. I think this is a team that could go to a Sweet 16 and Elite a Final Four if they get the right guys to mesh and gel together over the course of March. They shoot the three really well. Currently 4th in the country in terms of three-point field goal percentage. They run the floor exceptionally well. The pace of play is top 100 in Ken Pom's most recent rankings of adjusted tempo. And they haven't played their best basketball yet. And that kind of goes to your point. I think they do all these things very well. They play good defense when they want to. There's still some games. Still some games that are up in the middle.
Working on it.
High 80s. They average a significant amount of opponents' points per game. But when they want to play defense, they can. And you saw that in the Clemson game. I think that was a great impact. They were on the road against Clemson, 16th ranked team in the country at that point in time, and they needed stops down the stretch to keep them within striking distance. Got to stop. Scored a bucket. Got to stop. Scored a bucket. Got back and forth for a little bit, and then once you got down to the final 2 minutes of the game, Memphis didn't allow really any good opportunity for Clemson to take a high percentage look, a good shot attempt. And because of that, they ended up winning a game against a high-quality ACC team on the road. So all of that to be said, the consistency is there from a winning standpoint. If they want to get where they want to go, and that's with Penny Hardaway either cutting down nets or going to the Final Four or doing what Memphis expects to do like they used to back in the Calipari years, you need to have that level of consistency because your backcourt is as talented as any in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about some individual players as well. You already mentioned PJ Haggerty.
Yeah.
I think he was the rookie of the year in the American last year, but he was on a different team. So Tulsa. Memphis scoops him up. He has been absolutely incredible, averaging 22.4 points per game. I think, and it's not even on this graphic, but the thing that stands out the most for me about PJ Haggerty is the fact that he gets to the foul line a ton.
Yeah.
He's 120 for 144 from the free throw line. He's shooting 83.3%. So not only can he shoot the ball from three, he also has a great ability to get to the basket. And I think that has been something that's been so helpful for Memphis. And then you have Tyrese Hunter as well, who's also been really good. I just think that combo has been so fantastic for the Tigers.
You talk about the trio of those guys, Hunter, Haggerty, and then Colby Rogers. I want to throw him into the mix as well. All averaging together 49.8 points per game this year. So 50 points per game between three different individuals. They've made 96 of the team's 123 pointers this season. 14 games above 20 points individually between the three of them. 14 games. You look across the board, there's no backcourt as talented as Memphis. It's whether or not you can get all three to mesh at the same time. A lot of times there's not enough air in the basketball.
Right.
There's not enough time on the clock to get those guys rolling, and you can see because they have to trade. But a lot of times coaches at the collegiate level especially will talk about that third piece out of the backcourt, guys that can roll off of screens and shoot the basketball. If you can continue to, of course, they run the floor very heavily. They're very high in the transition game. But if you can set up in the half court and have three guys that you feel very comfortable or if not confident in to shoot the rock off of a ball screen and or taking the ball themselves to handle it, then where do you change your defense? Where do you shift your defense? If you're playing against the zone is open up on the perimeter anyways. If you're playing against man-to-man, you're going to have to double team somebody. So are you double teaming Haggerty or are you double teaming Tyrese Hunter? And that's going to leave somebody else open in the depth of that Memphis roster. So this is a really talented team. Once they put it all together, they could really be one of the best teams in the entire country, not just the American.
And for you, what do you think is that one final thing that will make them become more consistent, make them gel finally? Like you've been able to watch them for a little bit now, but we're talking about that consistency. You mentioned already a little bit just having those three different guys, but what's the one thing that you're like, oh, yep, this will seal the deal for
It's kind of tough because it's never just one thing. One game it's turnovers, the other game it's rebounding. It could be a couple of different things along the way. I really just want to see a well-rounded defensive team. That's just plain and simple. I think that might be a cop-out answer to a certain extent.
It's early. It
is early on, and maybe I'll come back to it.
That was a loaded question in episode 1, but I like to pick your brain on that.
I want to be able to have confidence in their defense to slow down an opponent. If you've got teams putting 82, 84, 86 points up against you on a routine basis, one of it's because you run the ball down the floor and you run in transition as much as they do, but it's not like they're the top transition pace team in the country. They're just in the top 50 or 60 or whatever they end up at right now. I want to see better defense, especially out of the half court. So if you can get more defense from Memphis, they'll be dangerous. I can say the same thing on the flip side. If you can get more offense from North Texas, they'll be dangerous. This is the Mean Green, a team in second-year head coach Ross Hodge. You talk about defense in the country. They've become synonymous with it throughout their years under Grant McCaslin and now under Ross Hodge in his second season. Since 2020, North Texas has held an opponent to 59 points or fewer, a total of 77 times, Maria.
How many? Say that number again.
77.
77.
which is the second most in the nation. During that time span, the only team that has done that more is the team that's at the top of that list right there in terms of points per game allowed this season, the Houston Cougars, which is, of course, a perennial top 25, top 20, top 10 team as of late. So North Texas playing that stout defense that they've had again, but they're doing so with an entirely remade roster, which is really interesting. Ross Hodge, I give him a ton of credit for gelling an experienced yet new group together. They bring transfers across the country, guys from Longwood, guys from Drake, guys from TCU, working them all together into this meshed team that's bought in the message that Hodge is bringing, which is we're going to play the best defense in the conference, and then we're going to find a way to score down the line too.
Well, one thing that I thought was really interesting, I watched a press conference with Hodge preseason, and he said the fact that we're bringing in so many new guys, we don't want it to be an excuse that, oh, everybody's new, we're gonna struggle. He said, no, we're going to find ways to be successful right from the beginning. This is the reality of college basketball right now. Everybody has a ton of new people on their roster. So if we let that be an excuse, then what does that say about us? So I think that he's really stuck to that message, and everybody's bought into, as you said, that message of playing that defense. Those numbers that you mentioned, Kyle, are just outlandish. And the fact that they're continuing with that message, it makes them a really difficult team to score on. Now, some people can get the better of them if they have a little bit more offense, and that's one thing that North Texas needs to work on, as you said, is just figuring out ways to score. But in one area that they're not struggling to score, or one player that's not struggling to score, is Atten Wright. He has been
awesome,
the leader of that offense. He has been so good for the Mean Green.
Yeah, he really has. You talk about the roster of newcomers, 10 newcomers, 7 transfers, 3 freshmen. The Mean Green replacing their top 6 scorers and 90% of their scoring from last season. Their leading scorer coming back is their post player in Mulai Sissoko. He also is their only returning starter. So you needed to find scoring from somewhere. They found it with Atten Wright, transfer from from Drake, different D team that plays good basketball. Transfer from Drake. Just an electric shooter, and he's a good ball handler too. He knows how to play the team game enough to where when you need a big shot, he'll take it. Hit a game winner in the final seconds against Oregon State. He hit a buzzer beater, a true buzzer beater, on the final second of the game in the conference opener against preseason favorite UAB in the Blazers. This is that Oregon State shot that he made right here. Just works around. He had not made a field goal in this entire game because he had 6 assists and he was working as a facilitator. Makes that shot. They end up beating the Beavers. He does it from NBA range, off of the jab step, outside, boom, hit it. And then he goes and does the same thing, similar scenario against UAB, except in that scenario, he had already scored into the 20s. And he's just an electrifying player. He's a steady hand for North Texas. Doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. And that's exactly what Ross Hodge is looking for on that ball club.
Yeah, I just think he does a really good job of taking care of the basketball, too. You talk about him being a facilitator and the way that he can handle the ball. But then, as you said, being able to take the big shot when he's needed. I think he's the leader that they kind of needed when they have so many new faces, and that's exactly what Ross Hodge wanted him to do. And so in addition to that, though, Hodge also has a bench that's been really contributing to that North Texas scoring. Yeah,
they've been great. You talk about the bench putting together a top 25 number in the Division I ranks in terms of bench production. It's not just one guy either. We talked about Atten Wright and what he can do from a shooting standpoint, but you've got Latrell Giselle, Jonathan Massey, Brennan Lorian, a transfer from Florida Atlantic, coming in there. He's been incredible. Started the year averaging in the mid-single digits, 5-6 points per game, and he's just exploded. He's put up 20 points in multiple games since then, and he's become one of the more athletic players in the conference. Actually, Ross Hodge said he's the most athletic player that North Texas has ever had as a part of their roster, and you can see it with the high-flying dunks and highlight reels that he brings to the table. But just the guard play that they have. I talked about the top-end guard play from Memphis and what they have with Haggerty and what they have from Rogers and those guys in the backcourt. North Texas has the deepest backcourt and the deepest bench in all of the American, which is completely different than what they had last year when they were rolling with 7 or 8 guys that they felt comfortable with playing significant minutes.
Well, you mentioned Laurent, like he's been coming off the bench and I think he's the second leading scorer on that North Texas squad. So it's just crazy when you talk about the depth that they have there. When you take a look at that and you've been able to call a lot of their games, like What do you think it is that they have been able to have so much depth? Do you think it's like him bringing in other people, or do you think it's more people buying in so that they're more willing and excited to play even if they're not starting?
It's the buy-in for me.
Yeah.
And when you look at going to a school like North Texas and you have a head coach like Ross Hodge who's won everywhere he's been, and including North Texas when he was the associate head coach under Grant McCasland, you buy into what he's selling. A lot of guys in this day and age of collegiate athletics want to get up and down the floor. They want to put up high numbers. They want to put up points. And they want to score a lot. Score. It's not what Ross Hodge wants. He wants you to slow down, take care of the basketball. We're going to out-physical the other team, and we're going to rebound well, and we're going to shoot the three pretty well. That's kind of what you have to buy into, which is not easy to buy in. So you have to have the right individual. No pun intended on Adden Wright. You have to have the right individual to step into that.
We have all the puns. We had a pun with him last week on Top Plays. But anyway.
Yeah. You have to have the right type of individual to buy in and to have that sort of success. So Latrell Giselle, Jonathan Massey, guys coming off the bench, they're going to average close to 10 points per game. They're not going to go and blow out 15, 16, 17 points per game like they may have at a different school. But what they do know is they're going to win a lot of games. They're going to get a lot of playing time because he does rotate these guys significantly. He'll stick with the same starting five almost every game. As long as everybody's healthy, he's going to stick with the same starting five all the way through the season. But when you can rotate these guys in with a high confidence level, high minutes per game average, they will buy in initially. So that's part of it. They're less reluctant to push the ball in transition than they have been in the past. In the past, it's almost a foregone conclusion. You're going to see North Texas set up in the half court. This year, because of the talent that they have and the guys that have bought in, he's going to let them run the floor if that's what's best for this team. And they've done it a couple times. That's how they beat Oregon State, is they beat them because they got into a rhythm by moving the ball in transition. That's why they beat UAB, because they were able to come back from a significant deficit and run the ball in transition. There are a lot of times where that team, I mean, you'd have to convince me otherwise, but there are a lot of times I'll look at that team and say they're better moving the ball than they are even playing the defense out of the half court and setting up in the half court on offense. So it is an interesting team, and that's what gives them the opportunity to be successful in March. And whenever they get to Dickies Arena, that's going to be a name to keep an eye on.
We'll certainly keep an eye on them. Another coach that's getting buy-in from his team, though, has been Adam Fisher at Temple.
Love it.
Just 10 wins already this year. Last year, only 12 in the regular season. Now, they did go on the run in the conference tournament. They picked up their 2,000th win as a program. So just a lot of good things happening in Philadelphia behind Adam Fisher.
Yeah, the names that are also in that 2,000 win club: Kentucky, Kansas, North Carolina, Duke, and UCLA. I mean, that's the who's who of college basketball, and Temple is up there too. That was the one thing I liked from Adam Fisher when that game came to a close and they had the celebration in the locker room. He said, "Gentlemen, there's lots of history in this program. You are already a part of that just by being here. You don't have to write your own history. It's like we get to be a part of it automatically. So take that with a big-time heaping of responsibility. Don't let the guys that came before you down in the fact that they've won 2,000 games as a program. It's really an impressive feat. But then you look at the way they've played this year. Jamal Mashburn Jr. has been on an absolute tear.
Oh my goodness,
he had 24 points against Rice this past weekend. 11th time this season he scored at least 20 points. Current scoring average 21 points per game, 12th in the country. At this point. So you've got a high-end buy-in, but you've also got some scoring ability there too.
Well, I think he just has so much college basketball experience. He started his career at Minnesota. He plays 3 years at New Mexico, and now he's at Temple. So he's been pretty much everywhere.
Those are 3 good programs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he's played at the highest level. He knows how to compete. His dad was also an NBA player, also an NBA All-Star in 2003. So I just think that there's so much history just within him that he's been able to bring to this Temple program. And then you get to play under a coach like Adam Fisher, who can rally guys and who can bring in other people. And they're talking about building. They're talking about being a part of this history. And I think that he has just really helped this Owls team be successful. And, you know, I know they slipped up against East Carolina, but I just think that overall they've been playing some really good basketball. And just some of the other transfers, too, that Fisher has brought in, I think we're starting to see them gel a little bit better. And as they continue into conference play, I'm excited to see where it goes.
Well, and remember where they made that run last year was because of the forward play and the way they got to the free throw line. And they've taken some of that success and pushed it into 2025. The fact that they are currently averaging 14 free throws made, not attempted, made per game. Currently top 15 in the nation in that category. They're 10th in free throws attempted. So, yes, they're still attempting a lot of free throws. They're making a lot of free throws at the same time. I want to see more of that as conference play goes along. There was a point in that East Carolina game. And East Carolina, I give a lot of credit to Coach Schwartz and what he's built at East Carolina because they haven't won a ton of games. And it's getting frustrating, I think, for that fan base because they have talent and good coaching. I will buy in on the fact that Michael Schwartz is a good coach at ECU. He outcoached Fisher in that Temple game in the fact that they got away from their identity. If Temple stays to the identity, which is something that Fisher built in the first place, I think there's an opportunity for you to have some wins along the way. I'm excited to see how this Temple team continues to build going into March because right now they have the high-end scoring and they have the fundamentals of getting to the free throw line, being physical, driving downhill, and taking advantage at the boards too because they're a good rebounding team as such too. So lots of elements of a team that's going to win a lot of games along the way.
Yeah, especially if they stick to that identity. And another team that we want to see stick to their identity maybe a little bit more is UAB. Not the non-conference slate that they maybe would have hoped for. 7-6 in non-league play. Now they're doing better as they've entered conference play. It looks like they're starting to figure things out. But as you were watching them in those first couple of games, I know for me, one thing that just really stood out was that gelling that we talked about, the chemistry that we talked about from other teams. It wasn't there for UAB.
Which is kind of shocking.
Because they returned so many people. There were at least 3 people who started last year who are now starting again for the Blazers. And so those moments where they blow 20-point leads or lose to teams that they should beat, it was just a little bit confusing to me as I watched them play in the non-league slate.
Yeah, especially with Andy Kennedy as a head coach. I've been a fan of Andy Kennedy since he was at Ole Miss, since he made the jump to UAB and went and won a lot of games in Conference USA. They make the jump to the American last year. And, of course, the rest is history. They win the American tournament and go to the NCAA tournament. So I have trust that Andy Kennedy will right the ship. And I would argue that it hasn't been broken, if that makes sense. I know they were 7-6 in conference play, but is this team really that upset about a 7-6 record in conference play? They lost to Vermont by 5. Good basketball team. High Point is a team that I think is going to the NCAA tournament this year. They lost by 3 on the road to High Point. Longwood did go to the NCAA tournament last year. They fell to them by 8. Illinois State by 1. Arkansas State, the same team that beat Memphis early in the season, beat them as well in overtime. And then they lost to North Texas at the buzzer in that conference opener on New Year's Eve. So all of that being said, I'm not looking at this UAB team and pressing the panic button just yet. This is still an experienced team that brings back a lot of scoring ability, and I like what they've done of filling in the gaps around guys like Yaxel Lindenborg and what they've brought from a talent standpoint of the top 3 or 4 guys on that roster. They've filled the cracks outside of that, and that's where I think the gelling needs to happen. If there is any gelling that needs to happen, they're going to win a lot of games.
Oh, 100%.
They're going to be right there at regular season title consideration and then going into the tournament as one of the top teams in the tournament. They could very easily go on a run and not lose another game until they get to the postseason.
Right.
Very easily, and I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, no, it's not like the hit the panic button. It's more just like, like scratch your head a little bit. I was more surprised because
that's a tough
was
schedule.
Yeah,
those names don't set off the alarm.
Right. But when you look at it and then you look at the records of those teams now, you're like, oh, it makes a little bit more sense. And so I think as UAB gets into league play, we'll see a little bit more of them and how they're able to be good. And a big reason that they've been good, not only this year, but last year, is because of Yaxel Lindenborg. He is insane. I think the thing about him is he just has the ability to score on all 3 levels. He just can do a little bit of everything. He's averaging 16.7 points per game. He's shooting 66.2%. And I don't know. I think that he's just done a really good job for them. And there's a reason why he was the preseason player of the year.
Oh, yeah. He's an incredible player, top to bottom. He's been great. And he's helped kind of continue the Andy Kennedy run of NBA caliber players. You got guys like Trey Jemison, who's now playing for the New Orleans Pelicans, and what he's brought to the NBA level. Of course, Jordan Jelly Walker was really fun. He's at the NBA G League level too, kind of a top-notch shooter, whereas Lindeborg is kind of that in-between cat. He's kind of the guy that's going to put up a ton of points, but he plays great defense and he rebounds like crazy. He's going to hit the boards where you need to. So continues the hot trend of players there. Do you think, just across the board here, where is their biggest strength as a team? Because last year I would have said rebounding and physicality. They were just more physical than the other teams around them. Sure, they could shoot the ball. Sure, they could go down the floor and run the floor heavily. I think this year it might be a different thought process.
What's their biggest strength?
No, I asked you the question first.
No, I'm repeating. Yeah, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Let me think about it for a second.
I'm thinking one, they're getting to the free throw line a lot.
Well, so I was gonna go free throw line, and I just think that not their 3-point game, but just like their actual shooting, like within the paint. I think that's where I'm looking more. Yeah, that's more of where I'm looking, because I don't think they're as, I don't know what the word is. Dominant's not the word I'm looking for, but I guess physical. Like they're still physical, but they don't have the as big of a physical presence as they did last year. It's still there, but just not as large. Okay. I'm like not explaining this well, but I'm
kind of enjoying this journey that you're taking us on.
This journey that we're taking on. All right, let me go back. The mid-range game, I like that they drive the lane, and I like that they're shooting at the ball well from free throw range. That was where I messed up on my last point about Yaxel. He's shooting 58.9% from field goal range, but I messed it all up. But that's what I would say for your. Yeah,
I agree with you. He fills up the box score. He does a little bit of everything. I would also throw the fact that they are just a menace of people in the paint. This is not an easy team to score on down low, because they will either take the ball away from you or they will block your shot. I mean, plain and simple, they've just got a ton of athleticism down low. When you've got a guy like Yaxel, who was preseason player of the year, who could very well be the player of the year still, he's playing like that. Just look at the numbers if you don't believe me. All of that pieces together into a team that's going to be dangerous. But it's right now it's those teams, the ones that we've kind of talked about here. It's North Texas, it's UAB, it's Temple, and then Memphis probably at the top of that list pretty significantly. Out of all four of those teams, the two players that stand out to me are Yaxel and PJ Haggerty. Yeah. Those are the top two players in the conference right now, in my opinion, because they're on the top teams. I know there's some other guys on the lower level teams right now in terms of standings, but I like what they've brought to their respective programs, and that would be my vote right now. Probably Yaxel or PJ Haggerty on Player of the Year.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting about each of them is that their games are a little bit different.
They're very different,
and I think that they add to their teams completely different elements. And I think when you make the point about UAB just being like so dominant and strong, like in the paint and different things like that, and then you look at Memphis, what did we talk about with Memphis is the guard play. Now, the paint play still exists for Memphis as well, obviously. We didn't even get to that. So I think that when you're talking about way too early predictions for Player of the Year, when PJ Haggerty and Yaxel Lindenborg, it's really cool to talk about them both in the same sentence, because they are very different players who are helping their teams in different ways. So
and I think Mashburn from Temple could be in that conversation. I think guys like Adden Wright could be in that conversation too, even though I know North Texas is going to win a lot of games. I don't know if they have a Player of the Year in my eyes, because they have such depth. If we're talking bench of the year, give it to North Texas. If we're talking depth as a whole, probably North Texas or UAB. It's high-end talent. It's going to be Memphis and UAB there too. That's what makes the Blazers so scary. Yeah. Whenever we get to that point.
Yeah, very, very scary. So, scariness of UAB, that's what we're talking about. But what else do you expect in the upcoming season, the rest of the season on the men's side?
Chaos.
I think so too.
I expect chaos.
I do expect chaos. Those teams that we talked about today, I think are going to beat up on each other. I don't know who's going to beat who, but I'm really excited for those matchups, and some of them are coming up.
They also have targets on their backs too.
Yep.
Because we're talking about those four teams, and it's really those four teams and then the rest of the group right now that are either trying to find their fold. I mentioned ECU. They've got talent. The Pirates can make some muddiness of the water if they can, no
they
pun
beat
intended.
Temple.
They did, and they could beat North Texas, and they could beat UAB, and they could beat all these different teams along the way. There's a real depth on the men's side of the game that and we'll talk about the women's side in a moment. I don't think the women's game has that same depth, top team to bottom team in the conference, where I think it might have been flipped last year. And last year I would have said the women's game had the top to bottom depth in the conference, and the men's it was mostly the top 6 teams or 7 teams that were significant. I think there's going to be a back and forth. Here are the games over the next 2 weeks, by the way. Just notable games across the way. Which ones are you keeping your eye on here?
Yeah, that Memphis Temple one for sure.
It's a barn burner.
I know. And I think it's just exactly what we talked about. All these teams have targets on their back. But when we were at Media Day, I asked, all right, pretty much every team, what game are you looking forward to the most? Everybody says Memphis. So anytime Memphis is playing, that's why I have that UAB Memphis one. I think I'm looking forward to that one. And that Temple North Texas, because North Texas, their defense is really good.
It's unreal.
And I want to see the way that they play Mashburn and the Temple Owls.
You and I will be in attendance for that one. I'll be on the call for that one. So that'll be a fun one. ESPN Plus on Wednesday, January 22nd. I want to throw out that UAB South Florida game too that's out there, and there's an FAU Tulane game the next couple weeks. Tulane's kind of a sneaky team too. Coach Hunter has them playing in the right direction. We're not going to talk about them in depth today. We'll do so in a couple weeks. But don't sleep on the Tulane Green Wave either as a team that could sneak up and beat some of these Temples in North Texas and UABs and Memphises at the top of the conference. So those games certainly great, but every week in the conference is going to be a wild one. All right, let's transition to the women's side of the game. There's a lot to talk about in terms of women's hoops, and of course the growth of the game is significant. You talk about last year and what Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and some of these national stars Cameron Brink brought to the forefront. Now you're starting to see that trickle throughout all of collegiate athletics whenever it comes to women's basketball. And part of that is you got to have your high-end stars. There are some stars on the women's side of the game.
Yes, there are.
First thing that sticks out is what UTSA has done. My goodness. Karen Aston has them playing.
A couple claps for Karen Aston right now. I know it's early in the season, but the way that program has transformed in her time there, the only undefeated team in conference play right now are the Roadrunners. And I just think a huge credit goes to Aston and her staff because they weren't that good a couple of years ago. Now she has them playing really well. Jordan Jenkins, when you mentioned some of those stars, that's one that we're definitely going to have to talk about.
When I was on the call for a couple of their games last year, I said the same thing twice. And Jenkins was banged up at a couple times. They never had their full weaponry available, it felt like, at any point in time last year. And that really hurt UTSA. Now they've got everyone back, and they were able to retain a player of the caliber of Jordan Jenkins, who might be the player of the year in the conference right now. Able to retain her is a big thing. Same thing with North Texas and Tamisha Lampkin. Jason Burton doing a great job of building off of that conference co-championship last year. You can say the same thing about Temple, conference co-champions last year. Here they are again as a team that no one really expected to repeat what they would do from last year. They were picked the 8th out of 13 teams in the preseason poll, yet here they are at 4-1 and still making a run at the top level of the conference. So yeah, that's where we're at. It looks like UTSA is the class of the league. North Texas, South Florida, Temple, they're the ones that are right there as the go-to elites of the American. But don't sleep on UAB, Tulsa, Tulane, Rice, some of these teams that are lurking, the challengers in the wings. Yeah, you used the lurking term earlier. But these are the challengers of the group, UAB, Tulsa, Tulane, Rice. Tulane already beating North Texas at home at the Evelyn Fieldhouse a couple weeks ago. This is a deep conference on one side. Yeah. I said that. I think if you can take Tulsa as a team out of that right side and you can throw them on the left, I would feel comfortable saying your champion is on the left side of that bracket.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think the teams on the right side there's a lot of first-year head coaches in that group right there, so I think that I want to give them 1 or 2 years, and I think that especially Charlotte, what they did at Jackson State, that staff, and now they bring it over to here, they know how to win games. It is just a new atmosphere for them, and so I think we'll see more, but in purposes for what we're talking about today, that left side is where I see a champion coming from, and I want to start with UTSA because we already touched on them a little bit. There's a lot to talk about with them, but they have been absolutely incredible. We said it multiple times. They're the only unbeaten team left. Head coach Karen Aston has the Roadrunners rolling.
Hey.
5-0 start to American play. Best start in conference play in program history since 1983-84. So definitely something brewing in San Antonio.
Yeah, and it starts with Jordan Jenkins averaging 20 points per game, 7 rebounds, an assist, a steal and a half, a block and a half, and she's shooting 51% from the field at the moment.
Is that good?
Yes, very, very good. Very good.
50?
USC transfer. She's been around for a hot minute. She's been around there for a while. I love watching Jordan Jenkins play. That's a WNBA talent, in my opinion, and I don't care what anybody else tells me. Sydney Love is back. She's playing great at the guard spot, shooting the ball effectively. 42% is the number I have on her right now. And then you've got DeLeon Negron as well as a guard. They've got 2 elite guards that can shoot and heat up at any point. And then you've got Jordan Jenkins down low patrolling the paint and guarding not only the best players on the opposing team, a lot of the best players in the conference. You think about the post play that the American brings to the table. She needs to step up on a defensive end of the floor. She's done that as well as be the go-to weapon on offense too.
Yeah, and I just love watching her play because there's just so much confidence in the way that she plays as well. And you talk about the
She knows she's the best.
Yeah, she literally does. But it's funny because when you actually talk to her just off the court, she's very like kind, timid. Not timid, but like just very kind. You wouldn't think about how good she is at basketball, basically.
No, she's a killer.
Yeah,
like,
so literally.
On the floor, she's a killer.
Yes, and you would never know that by having a conversation with her. So she has been so much fun to watch. And you talk about her defense, but the Roadrunners defense as a whole has been really good. I was looking at some of the things that Karen Aston was talking about, and she just wants more people to come to their games. And she was making this rally cry to show up for a game because we play really good defense. We love to pack. We love to basically attack teams, and I think that was something that was really interesting in the way that she's just so aggressive in the way that her team plays defense, and I think that's why they've also had some success in the early runnings.
Oh, absolutely. It all ties together, and you need leadership to have the run that they're currently on. I mean, 7 straight wins. It's the second time they've had 7 straight wins this season, and their only losses have come to Texas A&M, a team that is expected to compete at a high level in the SEC. And then Stanford, a team that's always expected to compete at a high level. So you've already beaten the high-end talents of UAB and Tulsa and Rice at the early parts, but they've got tests on the horizon. They've got to face Tulsa again.
Yep.
How about this stretch? This is the final 2 games in January, first 2 games in February for UTSA. Tulsa, South Florida on the road, Temple and North Texas, and they get them both at home. So you'd have the ability to play 3 of the 4 best teams in the conference at home, but then you got to go on the road to South Florida, and that's going to be a tough test, one way or the other.
Talk about atmosphere when Karen Aston's talking about creating an atmosphere at home for her team, going on the road at South Florida, a program that has been one of the best in the American in their entire existence, and then just playing in that arena where there's so many fans and there's just so much heckling, and I think it'll certainly be interesting. So let's now transition a little bit to South Florida. We talked about UTSA and everything that they've done. South Florida, again, one of the top teams in the American. They lost their first conference game to North Texas. You had a pretty good seat to that one.
Yeah, I called that game. That was a fun game, too, because North Texas jumped out on top. They were up 62-38 with like 7 or 8 minutes left to play, and then you saw, and we were astonished. It was me and Brian Burton on the call, and we were astonished at how much North Texas dominated a really good South Florida team. Yeah. South Florida is very impressive. And even doing the prep leading into that game, I still think they're the best team in the conference despite what happened against North Texas. But that shows what North Texas has. And these two do meet again on February 1st. Keep that in mind. So,
notable games.
And that one's in Tampa Bay. So I'm interested to see how they respond from here because they were really dominated by the Mean Green, and they responded in that game the way I expected them to. And
that fourth quarter, I think I was looking, it was 31-17. South Florida outscored North Texas.
And they went on a 16-0 run. It took just 3 minutes to take 16 points off of that North Texas lead. Made it a 2-possession game down the stretch, which was unbelievable in its own right just to get to that point. And it felt like they ran out of gas or time. They ran out of time, too. If that game may have been 5 minutes longer, they probably win that game. But, of course, we played 40 minutes total. You don't play 45 minutes. So got to do what you got to do. And they know how to win big games. They beat Duke earlier in the year at home. That was a top 10 win for Jose Fernandez and his squad. They are capable of taking down the best teams in the country, especially because they're not scared of any team in the country. Have you taken a look at their non-conference schedule?
Oh, my goodness. UConn's on that.
Yep.
They literally.
Number 2, UConn. You faced number 20, Louisville. You only lost by 4 to that Louisville team. Then you face Mississippi State. You faced number 3 South Carolina, and your first conference loss was to a team that won the conference title in the regular season a year ago.
And so the thing is, when you look at that schedule, especially the non-conference schedule, that's just preparing you when you get to league play, right? Yeah. So I think Jose Fernandez isn't scared of anything, and he wants his women to play the best of the best so that when they get into conference play, those tight games, those tough matchups, nothing's going to scare them. And I think the kind of players that he recruits are just like that as well. Yeah. I remember talking to Romy Levy at Media Day, and she was like, no, we're not scared of anyone. I specifically asked her about that South Carolina game. She's like, no, it's going to be a good game. Like, I'm like, and I bought in, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think that mindset is going to be something that will help them, not just because of the talent that they have. Now, they lost to North Texas, but you see in that fourth quarter, they do have that mindset that they can come back from anything, that they can beat anyone. And I think that's the mindset. The players are a big key as well. We mentioned Romy Levy. She's not having the season that
she's coming off the bench.
Yes, that's another.
Which is interesting.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, your preseason player of the year in the conference is coming off the bench.
Yeah, we'll have
she still plays a ton of minutes. Don't get us wrong.
We'll have to break that down in a longer episode. But Semi Puig is back from injury, and she's doing what she did before she got hurt, and that's a big reason why South Florida's
She's
been
a
good.
top 5 shooter in the country, and if you don't believe me, look at top 5 shooters in the country.
She's not afraid to shoot either.
No, she is not. Not afraid. That's a common theme there with South Florida. So she is a volume shooter, plain and simple. She's going to put up those top-notch shots, top 4 in the nation in terms of 3-point percentage or 3-point field goals made. She's made over 50, now 60, I believe. She's closing in on 60 throughout the year. I want to see the consistency that she showed early in the campaign in conference play, because you look at the numbers, 45% from 3-point line.
That's
I would
wild.
shoot 150 shots a game if I was shooting 45%.
Almost 50% from 3.
And that was part of the success that North Texas had against South Florida, was they shut down Puig on the outside for the first 3 quarters. And then what do you know? Going into the fourth, that law of averages started working right back in their favor, and that's how they were able to close the gap, because it wasn't just sensational Sammy out there making the outside shots. It was Mama Dembele. It was Victoria Blazic. All of these players, they have elite versatility across the way. Outside of really Lore Putu and what they bring in the paint, Blazic can drive or shoot. Dembele can drive or shoot. Puig is more of a catch-and-shoot player, and they'll use her on the perimeter. They don't want her to drive because she is so effective on the outside. Carla Brito, also outside shooter that can drive. They have that versatility that you give anybody the basketball, they're going to find a way to make it a high percentage.
Yeah, and all those people that you just mentioned, you didn't even mention Romy Levy, who, as you said, coming off like literally coming off the bench. And
Crazy.
Then and just from a scoring perspective, and then I think like one stat that really stood out to me too is with Mama Dembele, just 45 steals on the season as well. So she's not only
Pickpocket.
Yeah, so I love those little nuggets because we talk so much about scoring, right? But there's those other little things that I think South Florida can use as weaponry as well. But we got to talk Temple on the women's side now.
Do you want to talk North Texas first?
Oh, I guess we should talk North Texas.
While we're there, I mean, we could talk North Texas first, just since they ended up talking about that win. They were coming off of a big loss against Tulane on the road. We're down by 18 at halftime, stormed all the way back, took a 5-point advantage, and then kind of ran out of gas in their own right down the stretch against Tulane. So when that happened, Jason Burton challenged his team in what was a wild travel schedule to get back to a Dallas area that had been snowed over for the last few days. Got back in time, didn't practice, and when I was talking to him pregame, he said maybe it's a good thing we didn't practice because we would have run them into the ground. And he was like, we would have had a hefty practice because of what happened at Tulane. He said, maybe that's a good thing. He said, maybe that's God smiling down saying, you should give them a rest because they just lost this game. You're not going to get a chance to practice, and you're going up against one of the top teams, if not the top team in the American. Maybe you need to calm it down a little bit. Sure enough, they jumped out early and took full advantage of that USF team early on. And it built a lead enough to where even with a massive run from the Bulls, it still wasn't enough to overcome.
I know, watching that game, I was so impressed with North Texas because South Florida had been playing really well and has continued to play well. And North Texas made it easy is not the word I'm looking for because we talked about what happened in that fourth quarter, but they just looked dominant and confident. The big reason why Tamisha Lampkin just is so good.
Yeah.
And I think that watching her play, I mean, we've seen her a little bit last year do what she did, but she's just continuing that success. And I think that's really hard once people kind of know the kind of player you are and know what works well. It's easier to game plan. There's a lot more film on you, and she's just kind of defying that and saying, doesn't matter. I'm still going to beat you.
Tamisha Lampkin has been one of my favorite players, and I've been around. It was funny. I did the math the other day. I've done 9 years of calling games for North Texas Athletics now.
So you're old.
I am old now. That's what it is. 9
okay.
years. I've only graduated 7 years ago, or whatever it ends up being. But the thought process around all those student athletes, no matter what the sport is, Tamisha Lampkin's turning into maybe my favorite athlete I've ever covered there because of her story and the way she's stuck with it between two different coaching staffs. She was recruited by Jaylee Mitchell. Jaylee Mitchell replaced by Jason Burton last year. They expected maybe to have some trouble holding on to her because she did have some suitors in the portal. Instead, she sticks around. She stays at North Texas and ends up being the player of the year in the conference last year, or going into this year as the preseason player of the year in the conference. And she's lived up to that. She's lived up to the fact that she's added a versatility to her game. She can handle the ball like a guard at times, even though she's a 6'2" center down low. She's dominant in the defensive game, and she's helped to elevate the play of Anaya Johnson, another 6'2" forward that's in the starting lineup now for North Texas. Those two together are what makes North Texas such a tremendous task and a tremendous matchup, a tough matchup to crack, because not only do you have Lampkin playing at such a significantly high level and leading the team in field goal percentage and points per game and rebounds per game and top 5 in the American, all those categories too. But then you've got Anaya Johnson, who's a budding star in her own right, who's playing better and better as the year has gone on.
And so you can't just only look at Lampkin. You have to look at Johnson as well, just because it's almost like a two-headed monster. And then we haven't even touched on the guard play, but we're running out of time, I guess, because there's too much to talk about. But another thing about North Texas that we definitely want to touch on is their ability to get to the free throw line, and that's something that they've done a really good job of. That's one of my favorite. You know how I have like my favorite pettiness things? One of my favorite things in basketball is just teams that get to the free throw line, because I think games are won and lost there, and North Texas does such a good job of that.
They do. They got to hit those free throws too.
Yeah.
That was one of the reasons they lost some of their early games throughout the year. Part of why they were pretty far down against Tulane as well on the road at Devlin Fieldhouse was the fact that they have not hit those free throws at a high level. They're ranked in the top 15 in terms of free throw attempts. Right. Are they ranked inside the top 15 in terms of free throw percentage? No, not so much. So they've got to hit the free throws a little bit better. The guard play, like you said, Jocelyn Moore has been fantastic as of late. I really enjoyed watching her retake over a starting role. She was a starter last year for this team that raised a banner and won a conference championship. Asked to come off the bench because they have a transfer in Kyla Deck that's an elite on-ball defender, transfer from Stephen F. Austin. Deck's been out with a concussion the last couple of games. Jocelyn Moore comes in. What does Jocelyn Moore do? She puts up 23 points, 24 points, 9 points, and 10 rebounds, and then puts up another 15 points the other day against USF. So the depth is there from North Texas to be dangerous again. Foul trouble is the one thing that's their real kryptonite. If Anaya Johnson or Tamisha Lampkin get in foul trouble, you saw it the other day against South Florida.
Yep.
Part of why they made the run was because Anaya Johnson and Ariana Hardaway both were in foul trouble late in that game. If you aren't able to get in, if you can stick away from foul trouble, this is a North Texas team that can beat anybody in the conference.
What do you think for them? And I guess it's like a question that every coach wants to answer, but how do they stay out of foul trouble? Where do you think it's just like silly fouls, or do you think it's the way that they play defense, or it's just maybe not as much support from guards, like helping? What do you think it is?
Sometimes it's silly fouls. I don't really want to chalk it up to that. They play a physical brand of basketball.
Right,
they do it with Johnson and Lampkin. It's all about spacing and position on the floor. You got to be in the right place to guard a shot. You got to be in the right place to guard the lane. You can't get caught out of position. When you get caught out of position or the speed turns around, one matchup that's going to be really tough for North Texas is Jordan Jenkins and UTSA. When Jordan Jenkins shows the speed and that elite first step that they bring with her and the way she can spin and still remain under control in the lane, that's going to be tough on Johnson and Lampkin to try and combat. Now, they've played UTSA a ton of times. Remember, they made the jump together from Conference USA. Karen Aston knows North Texas because she coached at North Texas before she jumped to Texas and took over for the Longhorns down in Austin. So there's a lot of combination between those two. That's the battle of the year, in my opinion, through the conference. It's going to be UTSA in North Texas. It's going to be Jordan Jenkins versus Tamisha Lampkin in the post. That's must-watch television.
I'm excited for that one as well.
I don't even know if I have that game.
Do you have that game?
I don't know.
We'll have to check back in. All right, must-watch television. All American Conference games, but especially North Texas and UTSA women's basketball.
Especially.
Yeah, we're circling that one on the calendar.
And Temple, too. I want to give a lot of credit to the Temple Owls and what they've done to kind of like what we talked about with the men. The Temple men are the same way. They're kind of underrated, under the radar, maybe a little overlooked after making a great run last year. Now the Temple men were the 11 seed that went to the conference championship finals, whereas the Temple women won the conference regular season title along with Tulsa and along with North Texas. But they were picked to finish 8th. Maria?
That's why I was so surprised that they were so overlooked because of what they did last year. I mean, I know that the team's a little bit different now, but I like Richardson as a coach. I think she does a really good job, and I think that there's something intense about her that I just really like watching her on the sideline. I'm like, oh, yeah, this woman knows what she's doing. Nice. I know you can't determine the quality of a basketball coach based on their intenseness, but I'm going to do it in this instance. And she's doing it with her team as well. They're 4-1 right now. They're doing a really good job. And overlooked, I don't get why, though. They did well last year. I don't know why everybody's like, 8th.
Yeah, I don't know.
This is why we don't vote on these things, because I'd have different opinions.
They should let us vote on these things.
Just
by the way. I agree with you. And maybe that's because they anticipated to go back to 23 and 22, where they were 11 wins in 23 and they were 13 wins in 22, and they graduated a significant amount of their production. But you win 20 games last year, 13 of those in conference play, and then you put up nearly 70 points per game, which was 4th in the American last year, and you played defense in a top 4 or 5 ranked last year too. That's not always just players.
Right.
That's a mentality. That's a scheme, and I think Temple has showed, at least early in the season, 10 wins already. They're 4-1 in conference play, that they should be thought as one of the top teams in the country, or top teams in the conference rather, especially because of what they've done on the defensive end. They went from a top 3 defense last year. They're putting up similar numbers, and they're taking the ball away at a high level too.
Well, when you watch them play defense, it's just that aggressiveness and that tenacity. I think we've already had a couple top plays where there's just so many double teams, and there's chaos, and then there's a full court layup, and there's just so much going on that I think that they really fluster and frustrate teams. And I think when you're not used to playing at that speed, or you're not used to that intensity, it kind of startles you for a little bit, because when you look at some of the teams in the American, especially on the women's side, not everybody plays that level of defense, that kind of constant aggressiveness, the double teams that I've even seen a couple triple teams on some Temple. No, yes. But so I think that people aren't as prepared for it, and you could prepare your team for it, right? You can watch as much film, you could set up the scout team in practice, but until you actually get on the court and you feel that intensity in game, like, then you're not actually going to know what it's like until you're there. And so I think that Temple kind of puts people out of position in that instance, and that's on the defensive side. Offensively, they have Tiara East, who's been really good. I mean, I think she's been featured on a couple of our top plays as well as Reddy.
Well, and it's not just East either. You've got East, Gary, and Turner all averaging double figures in conference play, and then you've got Rivera and Taylor, and I'll throw I haven't had their game yet, but Molina in the mix too, as a kind of a another couple players that you can rely on to score. All of them are averaging above 5 a game and have been at least contributing on the offensive end. But like you talked about with the steals, they're averaging 10 steals a game. Averaging steals, not turnovers in general. Those are literal pickpocket. Give me the basketball and let's go. Give me the rock, let's ride. No, those are legit steals, and they've gotten a lot of that from Rivera and from Taylor and from Molina either off the bench or in a rotation at the guard spot and forward spot. So I'm interested to see where they continue to take the steps forward, because we talked about how they were picked to finish middle of the road, 8th in the preseason poll. Here are the wins that they have in conference. UAB below them, East Carolina below them, Florida Atlantic below them, and Tulsa above them in the preseason poll. So they have 1 win and 1 loss against the teams that were voted above them. The other one was South Florida. That was a single-digit loss on the road in Tampa. So Temple.
Lots of T
teams that we're talking about.
Lots of T teams.
Temple has shown me enough right now that I can confidently say they're going to contend. They're going to play tough against North Texas later in the month. They're going to play tough at UTSA a couple days after that. They're going to play tough against South Florida at home on February 8th. You got to win some of those games, though. You can't lose all those if you really want to try and show we're supposed to be in that elite company in the conference.
Well, if you even take a look at their non-conference slate, they had some big wins in the non-conference as well. Some of the better teams in the A10. They also beat some Big East teams as well. So I think that those non-conference games tell me a lot about their capacity to play at a high level as well. Yeah. Because I think that when you look at those schools that they're beating, I think that they can beat some of the teams in the American. As you said, those were below, but when I want to see them against South Florida, I want to see them against UTSA. Those matchups are the ones I'm circling on my calendar as well. They're
going to have to show out in those games. Yes, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. And right now, people are overlooking Temple as one of the best teams in the American, and I'm here to say that shouldn't be happening. They're playing well-rounded basketball. Coach Richardson's doing her thing again. Not a shocker. She's won championships before, made it to the semifinals of the tournament last year. The one team that made it in a deep run after winning the American regular season title. Give me Temple to make some noise down the stretch. What else are you looking forward to, Maria, as we close out on the women's side of the standings?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to UTSA playing the top teams in the conference, because they've beat some of the middle of the pack bottom teams, and I want to see them play the South Floridas. I want to see them play the Temples, and I think that's going to be a test. I still think they're very good, and I think that they're going to show out in those games. But I want to see the top teams in the American start to play each other so that we have a better idea of who actually is top dog. I think that's the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to. And I also want to see if, when we looked at the standings, those schools on the right side, can they move into like a middle of the pack? Can the league become a bit more even? Because right now it's pretty divided down the middle. Yeah. So I want to see as the season goes on, does it become more, like we talked about on the men's side, more meshed top to bottom, or is it still pretty staunch and this is the bottom half and this is the top half of the conference?
No, that's a good point both ways. I want to see... I kind of want to see some of these rematches. The games that have already happened.
Yeah, I love a good
South Florida, Temple, they're playing again. They'll flip in home and home.
Yeah.
North Texas and South Florida, they'll flip, and North Texas will go down to the Yuengling Center. Who are some of the other ones? Tulsa does not play Temple again. I wish that was a rematch. But I want to see some of these games. North Texas and Tulane are going to play again down the line. Here's some of the notable games over the next week on the women's side of the game. I want to see these rematches because was it a fluke or was it not? Was this a thing or was it not? And that might help us kind of separate who is the elite in the conference and who is a pretender at that point too. So lots of great games here. Anything circled at the moment?
I mean, we didn't even talk about Rice, our defending tournament champion. And so that Rice-North Texas game, I think Rice is 2-2 right now. And so we haven't been able to touch on them as much. Yeah. But, I mean, there's a reason they won the tournament at the end of the year last year. Malia Fisher's back. She's always been good for the Owls. So that one, I think, stands out to me.
We're going to head over there tonight.
Yeah. So excited about that.
On my way that way momentarily. I'm going to circle. Man, this is tough.
I know there's a lot on there. I guess I just read that one.
UTSA UAB is kind of a sneaky game. UAB's always been a fun team to watch. Randy Norton has won a lot of games down in Birmingham. They weren't anticipated to be good this year, yet they're still winning a couple games here and there. They've got 11 wins on the season already. Can UAB challenge Jordan Jenkins and that UTSA bunch? That's my number one thought process moving forward. All right, time to get into one of our favorite segments of the entire week. Yes, we had it for football. Yes, we have it for basketball. It's time now for our American top plays of the week on All-American. Starting at number 5, got to go to the hardwood. How about Tulane men's basketball? How about the baseball pass? You're a softball person.
I love this. Look, it's a baseball pass. Oh, wait, but there's more. He's going to dribble it out, finds Banks wide open underneath, slams it down.
How do you allow for Banks to throw it down like that? Underneath. I talked about Tulane being a sneaky team. They're sneaking on the floor just like they are in the standings.
There you go. Double sneaky right there. The cool part about this, too, was Banks actually fell on a ball and then called the timeout so that they could draw up the play and then ended up getting – so there's like a whole backstory to this as well. And this was a huge moment in this game for Tulane.
2-point game.
Yep. And Tulane ends up winning it. So I think there's so much more, but the actual action of him being that wide open, pretty cool.
Pretty sweet.
We'll stay on the hardwood. Same game, actually.
What?
Yes, same game.
Is that allowed?
It is this time, but this is South Florida because this is a whole team effort. There's a save by Jimmy Williams, right? He's going to pass it ahead. Then we talked about Jameel Reynolds last week. Yes. Another big slam from him. Look at the perfect alley-oop pass. Whew. The Bulls really figuring it out at that point in the game. They did not at the end.
The running of the Bulls?
Running of the Bulls. Ooh, that was a good pun.
Yep.
We had a lot of at and right puns last week. Running the Bulls this week.
You could have had that on the lower third. Instead it says Bulls team effort gets a bucket.
Okay, I was creative. I was creative on the other ones. All right.
Nobody asked me for creative freedom. It's cool.
You know what? Go to your next play.
I will. How about that? UTSA has been the talk of the women's standings this season. Sometimes when you play that well, you kind of need the ball to bounce your own way. How about this? Udo on the baseline goes all the way back outside. De Leon Negron outside drills the 3. It was a baseline desperation play from Udo to even secure possession. She turns around and snipe shots it to the top of the key where you've got De Leon Negron ready to knock down the jumper. Big time.
Made it look so easy just.
The pass is what this one's all about for me.
I mean, like this. Like she's on one leg here, right?
She's basically Derek Jeter in the shortstop hole, like turning around and making a throw.
With beautiful arm angle on that as well.
Absolutely.
They should use that when they're teaching infield drills.
This is a basketball show,
It's a basketball
Maria. Why
show.
are we talking about baseball passes?
Because it's almost softball. Anyway, let's stay on the hardwood. We're going to go to the men's game, though. This is Florida Atlantic. This one, I'm just going to let it play out because you just got to watch it.
Oh!
Nothing to say there. That's Caleb Glenn. He's unfazed. I think he deflated that basketball. Watch it again.
It left a hole like a crater in the baseline there, too.
Oh, my goodness.
That's, How much confidence does it take to go that high up, knowing that if you whiff, you're either going to foul the guy
or you're going to look like an idiot.
Or you're just going to whiff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of confidence.
Caleb Glenn.
A lot more confidence than I have.
All the confidence in the world.
It worked out. Worked out for him.
Definitely worked out. All right, our top play of the week here on our first All-American top plays of basketball season. Late game, late fourth, tie ball game. Oh, my goodness. The tip back up and in. Temple with the ball. They needed to find one of their best scorers. They did that. They went to Kayla Turner. She has the long 2 off the mark, but no fear. Maya Oliver there to clean it up on the tip in with .1 on the clock. Temple and the team that we talked about just a couple moments prior taking down Tulsa at home off of the miss and the tip in.
I love that. Somebody else getting involved in the scoring. And you know what? There was even an intense shot there of Richardson just to prove my
To
point
show
further.
how
Yeah,
intense
how
she
intense
was.
she is. She drew up that play. It worked. Oh, my Oliver. See, we have the creativity there on that.
That is
Lower
good.
third
That was
graphic
good.
better? Yeah?
Yeah.
You like that one better?
I do.
But no, definitely Temple, a team to watch, and them making some noise in the American this year.
No doubt. And a team that I think was underrated initially. You see the teamwork. We mentioned a lot of names there about who their top players are. Those are two players that are role players, and they make it done. Get it done in that regard to beat Tulsa, one of the other top teams in the conference. So that's going to do it for us. A lot of information over the last hour talking about the men's basketball standings and schedule and the women's basketball standings and schedule. Next week, we're going to go more detailed. We're going to get a little bit deeper into some of these other teams that are represented across the American and what it's going to take home another conference title. Maria, great as always.
This was fun. I'm excited for next week. It's basketball season.
Yes, it is. They haven't taken our basketballs away
And
just
we didn't
yet.
hurt anyone with them just yet. Kyle didn't make me mad enough that
Day is still young. It is still young.
we got a lot of time left. So
For Zach and Chris in the back, for Maria Trivelpiece, I'm Kyle Youmans saying so long. Enjoy hoops, everybody. We'll be back week with more All-American from Studio A.